Hello, everybody, and welcome to the NextGen Planners podcast. My name is Dan, and I'm the head of community experience here at NextGen Planners. And today, I am very, 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 very happy to be joined by Mr. Brian Byrnes from Moneybox. How are you doing today, Brian?
Yeah, not too bad. Thanks for having me on. Really excited.
No, it's a pleasure, mate. It's very, very good to have you on the show and to hear some fresh perspectives on the world of personal finance from someone who is quite new into their role as well. How long have you been at Moneybox now?
Yeah, so I joined 2 months ago, so just starting to find my feet, which is good. When you start a new role, I always feel like it's kind of putting a jigsaw together in terms of kind of who does what and where you can have impact and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So getting through that phase now and actually starting to get the work done, which is good.
Good stuff. So, for anyone in the audience who doesn't know Brian, he is head of personal finance at Moneybox, and they've got some. I mean, you've probably, I think a lot of people probably would have seen Moneybox who's in the audience. If you haven't, they've got some brilliant advertisements and stuff out there that a lot of people see. But just to kick things off, can you just tell us a little bit about what it is that you actually you do on a daily basis over there at Moneybox?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for people that aren't familiar with Moneybox, it's a saving and investing app. And what we're trying to do is help our customers turn their money into something greater. So basically, we've brought savings, investing, retirement, and home buying together into one app. And we're now serving upwards of 850,000 customers. I came in kind of 2 months ago with a dual mandate, basically. So half of my role is kind of working with the product team here to build out what a future financial planning journey, a digital one, would look like, which is very exciting. And then the other half is kind of public facing comms. So doing this sort of stuff and kind of amplifying the Moneybox voice and also doing some internal stuff and trying to give confidence to our customers in terms of how they're managing their money in what is a incredibly difficult time, which I'm sure we'll come on to later on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great time for us to have this conversation actually with everything that's going on here in the UK at the moment. And the advice gap has probably never been as wide as it is now. And that has never been clearer when we're going through things like the cost of living crisis. So it's I love hearing from people and organizations who are trying to think a bit differently and try to make advice a bit more accessible. So yeah, it's great to have you on and talk about this. So I guess we'll just kind of we'll start with your personal journey a little bit. So that's involved moving from, shall we say, more traditional advice organizations. I'm sure that everybody can in the audience can think of at least one when we say that, to a more like to tech and hybrid financial planning kind of organization instead. I know that you said, Moneybox is moving into the world of financial planning, but we'll
Yeah.
describe it as that for now. But I mean, this must be I'm hoping this is very interesting perspective. How have you noticed the difference between those two different types of organizations, and what do you see as the key differences between them, having worked in both?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I'll start with a couple of similarities because I think they are important. I think the one thing that I've noticed in all the organizations that I've worked for is the focus on the customer. I think you see headlines and you see some horror stories, unfortunately, is the kind of bad news cases that do make the news and make for the kind of best headlines where people don't put customer best interests at heart. But I think the great thing about our industry is 99.99% of people that get into it and the companies that are in this industry really are focused on trying to solve the customer problems. And the other similarity is you do have a lot of customers in need of a solution, and different companies provide that in different ways. Some quite traditional face-to-face financial advice as we know it, and then some people like Moneybox trying to do it digitally to probably more of a kind of mass market audience. So they're the two similarities. I think the differences probably won't be that much of a shock to anyone. I think the pace of play when you get into kind of digital providers is much, much, much quicker. You get, from my perspective, a lot more responsibility quicker to actually instigate the changes that you would like to see in terms of how we serve our customers. Obviously, looking at technology first, I think some of the more kind of traditional players are getting around to this idea now, but it was quite a slow burn to harness technology, and now they're trying to catch up kind of pretty quickly. And then the other big difference is the barrier to entry. So one of the reasons that caused me to leave the more traditional end was just how many assets or how much assets you needed in order to get financial advice. And when you get to the real upper end of that market, yes, people are in need of technical advice and inheritance tax planning and all that sort of stuff. But my view is once you get to that level, your actual kind of desperate need for financial advice is less than people that are starting out on their journey and may not have as many kind of assets to play with at the very start. So I prefer to work where there's less barriers and you can help people get started investing and then hopefully grow with them kind of on that journey and add value along the way. So I think they would be the major differences that I've seen between traditional advice and a more kind of hybrid digital financial planning.
Yeah, I guess a lot of them probably don't come as a surprise to many people in the audience. I'm just to kind of focus on the last thing that you're talking about there. The compound interest and that kind of the advantages of getting involved in personal finances early on is in my opinion one of the most interesting things and underrated things that we don't talk about. We do not talk about that enough, I don't think. But then again, you know, even when I do talk about it to my friends, about like I show them a compound interest calculator of how much they could have by the time they're 60 if they just put, you know, £50 a month into an ISA or pension now. And in that moment, they're like, wow, this is amazing. But then 5 minutes after we finish that conversation, they've forgotten that conversation. They don't. So, you know, I completely agree with you, but being more active with this kind of stuff is, you know, you could imagine the difference we could make to the world by just getting people to get engaged with this stuff earlier on. It would be amazing to see. And of course, it would result in, you mentioned there about the kind of, you bring in the house buying stuff and everything like that into Moneybox as well. So it also achieves goals in the short term as well. You know, we're not having to think 20, 30 years down the line in terms of retirement, maybe 40 years down the line in terms of retirement. We're thinking maybe the next 5-10 years when we're buying a house or something like that. And those tangible kind of early short-term goals mean a lot more to people than perhaps the long-term goals do a lot of the time. So it's great that you've brought that in as well, which is good. Okay, this isn't really the elephant in the room, but because we talk about it all the time, but we all know that as we record this right now, there is a cost of living crisis going on here in the UK. And I don't know if I don't actually know the figures on whether it's getting worse or getting better. I'm certainly not hearing anything about it getting better. So therefore, in my kind of nihilistic brain, I'm thinking things must be getting worse. But how do you think, and from your perspective, how do you think that financial planners can, during this time, be helping their communities? And I don't just mean their clients, but I also mean their local communities as well. How do you think that financial planners can help during this time?
Yeah, I think there's a few different ways. I think number one is we just need to start by acknowledging how hard the situation is for all of us really at this point, but just building on as much kind of empathy and being as human as we possibly can be about it. So I say a colleague of mine was kind of talking today about how scary we found it seeing our pensions and ISAs and any investments kind of down over the course of the last 6 to 12 months. So we're the ones kind of with the technical knowledge, and it's still very unpleasant to log into your account and see kind of the damage that's been done over the last 6 to 12 months. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that. So that's kind of the first step. But I then think we do need to jump into the harder conversations. As I say, we are the ones with hopefully the technical knowledge, and we are the ones who are best placed to help people and guide them through this extremely kind of difficult period. So I feel we should, as an industry, be running as many and as much different educational pieces as we possibly can do, speaking to as many clients as we possibly can do, because you can be absolutely sure this hasn't escaped anyone. You can't fill your car with petrol. You can't go to the shops without seeing the impact on this. So your clients are going to be worried about it. Your friends and family are going to be worried about it if you're not just looking at your client book. Like, my friends are talking about it, my family are talking about it. So we are the ones that should lean into those hard conversations. And even though there's no simple answer or simple solution, we should be trying to impart the knowledge that we do have, given the exams that we've gone through and the hundreds of thousands of conversations that everybody in the NextGen Planners network will have had. So I think we need to, as I say, acknowledge that this is a difficult time, but it is a time where our industry can really help, because it is people's wallets and people's investments and people's savings that's been hardest hit at the moment.
Yeah, that's that you finished it perfectly, because there's a difference between the effect that this is having on our daily like budgets and daily kind of our day-to-day lives and our day-to-day finances. And of course, it's affecting our long-term finances as well. But there's a difference between saving and investments and budgeting and spending. And financial planners usually focus on the kind of more savings and investment side. But when they work with clients, they also look at the budgeting and the spending side as well. So I think it's a cool time for financial planners to maybe do a little bit of pivoting as well and moving towards kind of, why can't we look at this budgeting and spending stuff, because we all know how much it matters as well. So, okay, that makes sense. Another part of this, that you mentioned it a few times when you were talking there, is the financial education. And I think there was something we were talking with someone from the Money Charity a few weeks ago, and it's a tiny percentage of people. I think it's like 14% or something of people put school down as their main source of financial education throughout their lives. So we're not getting taught about it from an early age. And the time when we usually learn about finances is when we have to do something. The time when you learn about mortgage is when you're getting a mortgage. So how, again, it kind of looking at financial planners, how do you think that we can become educators at scale? How do you think that we can turn that financial education gap and that problem into something very, very useful? Because like you said, we're the ones with the knowledge. How do you think we can actually scale that up a little bit?
Yeah, I think when I kind of hear the word scale in that context, it does mean digital kind of to me. So you're talking about things like social media, YouTube, like email newsletters. I think you're getting very popular now, but it's multi-channel kind of approach and meeting the customers kind of where they are today. I think different people digest this kind of educational content different ways. So you can't just provide it one way and think your customers are going to read every word you've written or listen to every word that you've talked about on a podcast or a video or anything that you've put on kind of social media. So I'm a big fan of a lot of the content that's out there on Instagram, kind of Twitter and TikTok. Again, we kind of hear the horror stories, and I don't think anybody would disagree that it needs some form of moderation, but there's a lot of kind of good stuff out there as well. You obviously don't want to see people on TikTok advising putting 100% of your assets into cryptocurrency, for example. So as I say, I think we're all agreed that there needs to be some form of regulation. And I think Facebook have taken a good step to that recently in terms of checking financial promotion, seeing if you're registered with the FCA. So it is possible. But for me, when you're talking about financial education at scale, I think it is out there on those social media platforms, digital platforms now. And we just need to make sure that it comes from probably the people that we want to be providing that advice, in terms of the people kind of with the education, with the exams, and kind of with the skills. So as I say, it's about meeting customers kind of where they are on the platforms that they're already on.
Yeah. There's some brilliant people who probably might be listening to this now, and I think everyone can probably think of some financial planners who are doing some great stuff in this area. So it's out there. We perhaps just need to kind of all be doing our little bit in some way. Would be good.
Yeah, and it's hard. It's kind of just building on that very quickly. It's like chipping away conversation by conversation. Like, unfortunately, some of the stuff that does get a lot of traction is the more sensationalist stuff in terms of doubling your money in 6 or 12 months. Like, yeah. I don't think anyone, again, would disagree that good financial advice and good financial planning can be a little bit boring, especially for kind of social media sometimes. But it's something that you gain the advantage of kind of over time. So again, it's conversation by conversation, kind of piece of content by piece of content. And as I say, you guys at NextGen Planners are great at that, of just kind of consistently putting out really, really good content across lots of different channels. And I think, as I say, we could all learn a lot from that.
Yeah, absolutely. This is an interesting question, this one. And it's kind of going to close off the cost of living conversation. But like, it's going to have long-term effects. I think we would probably all agree with that in some way, shape, or form. It's interesting to see like the figures from people who were a certain age during the 2008 global financial crisis, and the way that they've grown up, like the way that they are with money since they're growing up. But when we think of the current cost of living crisis and how that's going to affect people in the future, from your perspective, do you think that's going to make people actually engage with their finances more as a result? Or do you think that it'll make them fear personal finance more going forward?
I'd lean towards the fear side of things, just because the headlines are scary and the day to day at the moment is incredibly scary. I think it's like quite difficult to go to the petrol station, have to spend over £100 to kind of fill up your car, or go do your weekly shop, and it's gone up 50% kind of based on what it was last year. And a lot of people just don't have the wiggle room to begin with. So I think that is quite scary, quite fear inducing. When I think about engagement, actually, weirdly, when in my career I've seen the most engagement with personal finances was during the pandemic, when people had a bit more time on their hands. Obviously, that was a scary time from a public health perspective, but from a personal finance perspective, a lot of people had more time on their hands, and a lot of people's personal finances actually improved, because they were kind of going out less and there was just less opportunity to kind of spend money, to be honest. So it doesn't really feel like that to me now. It feels like there's a lot more kind of fear out there, and I think the completely understandable reaction when there's these headlines out there, is somewhat to bury your head in the sand a little bit. So I wouldn't be expecting kind of being overwhelmed by people engaging with their finances as perhaps they were when they had more time on their hands and their personal finance situation was a bit more positive maybe 2 years ago.
Yeah, I'm fast. I think there will be some way to track. There definitely will be some way to track this in the future. But like I'm actually fascinated by how that's going to look in the future, and the kind of the perspectives and the attitudes of, let's just say, the current generation, whatever you want to call it, in the future, and in terms of their financial situation. I think it's going to be really interesting to look at in the future, compared with other generations as well. So you guys at Moneybox then, so you're aiming to make obviously personal finance more accessible for people in the UK. I think you mentioned that there's over 800,000 people now who are on Moneybox in some way, shape or form. But when we think of financial planners and our profession, because that's what we call it now, we're trying to be a profession, so therefore we can get there by potentially calling it that. What do you think that we, as financial planners, though, could be doing to make it more accessible? And when I say more accessible, I primarily mean to those who are, let's just say, under 40. What do you think that financial planners can do to actually help that?
Yeah, I hear a few things when I hear kind of accessible. The first one, when it comes to our profession, I think is affordable. I think there's been a lot of work done over the last 10 years for everybody to make their charging structures more transparent and more clear, which is great. But I still think without good context and good reason for somebody to engage with a financial planner, an upfront fee of £1,000 when we've got a cost of living crisis is still quite difficult, or a percentage fee, whatever it might be. So I think answering that value for money question really clearly, I think, makes financial planning more accessible. This is what you're going to get out of the process, basically. Mm-hmm. I think also when we're talking about accessibility, I think there's more work to be done in terms of making the whole process more engaging. From a personal perspective, this might be kind of a little bit controversial, but I don't think 40-page fact finds or suitability reports are particularly engaging or accessible. And again, it turns people off engaging with the industry. Again, a lot of progress has been done on that, but a lot more work can be done. And the last thing when I think about accessibility is the diversity of the profession. I think for a very long time, our industry was tailored towards kind of white professional males and was very, very inaccessible to anyone that didn't fit that box. And again, strides have been taken, but there's a lot more to be done to make engaging with a financial planner less terrifying for somebody that hasn't done it kind of previously.
Yeah, again, yeah, completely agree with all of the things you just said. To be honest, I think something that's going to be quite big in this area is probably going to be that kind of hybrid. We've talked on this podcast before about robo advice, and I almost cringe every time I say that term, because I know that everyone out there has got an opinion on robo advice. The term that we use nowadays is sometimes called tech-enabled advice or hybrid financial advice and things like that. This, I didn't plan to ask you this question, but what are you seeing in that area, and how do you think that's going to affect things in terms of accessibility as well?
Yeah, I think I would massively agree with you that robo advice word is now just such a loaded word, and people have such kind of preconceptions of what it is. Some might be positive, but a lot of them are negative when you think about kind of how robo-advice have been delivered since it's been around. Can you do it at scale, profitability, all that sort of stuff? And also the customer approach to robo-advice. They probably, my view is that they don't think that there are humans there taking good care kind of over their money. And I'm not sure people do trust a fully digital journey. So my personal view on that is some form of support, guidance, or advice kind of on demand when the customer needs it, to be honest. So trying to be as flexible as you can be and be there at the parts of the journey where you can add value, and be there at the parts of the journey where a customer needs that bit of handholding, or potentially just that reassurance that not everything is down to robo or an algorithm, that there are people there taking the due care that there should be with people's life savings, pensions, that sort of thing. So it comes back to that hybrid word that you reference. And again, just meeting customers kind of where they are and how they want to interact with you. And I think the pandemic has helped with that in terms of things like video calls being much, much more common than they were. People being much more willing to engage with kind of chat kind of on demand as well. So a lot of progress that's been accelerated kind of due to factors outside of our control, I think, over the last kind of 2 years. I don't think we'd be anywhere near the proliferation of video calls and that sort of stuff had the pandemic not happened.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like literally, that is more accessible. Like having a now the accessibility, the availability of Zoom calls and stuff immediately makes it more accessible. So if you're looking for the ultimate silver linings of the pandemic, that's probably one of them, isn't it? It's brought our profession certainly, a few years forward in terms of accessibility as well, which is good. Something interesting, I've just remembered that you said there was about suitability reports and fact finds and things like that. Yeah, that's something that I don't think that's controversial at all to say that, to be honest. I think everyone in the audience,
not in this community, I think.
No, absolutely not. I think even in other communities, I think even they would recognize that that's probably not the most engaging thing for clients to have. And there's been, like you said, there's been some great work in this area done as well, which is good. So one of the I was just going to say as well that with the hybrid thing, I was talking to someone the other day who's like they are building this hybrid kind of advice thing at the moment, and she said something amazing, which was that one of the things she gets most frustrated about is when she hears financial planners talking about this and then saying, oh, it's been tried before but it doesn't work, so therefore we're not going to try it again. And that is the most defeatist kind of like attitude to have. It's like, it hasn't worked in the past, so therefore why would we try it again? And if we think like that all the time, we're never going to get anywhere, because there's millions of things in the past that haven't worked a million times, but then there's one time where it does work and it's worked fantastically well. So it's a big area, it's a growing area. I'm very excited to see what's going to come out of this hybrid stuff as well, which would be good.
Yeah, just quickly building on that, there's no one size fits all from a financial planning perspective. So because somebody's tried one approach and it hasn't worked doesn't mean you just stop. As I say, the process that we're going through now, financial planning, hybrid journeys can look 1,000 different ways. So as I say, just kind of giving up because one version of it didn't work before, when there's, in our view, hundreds of thousands of customers and millions of people out there in the advice gap that need something to fill that gap, then as I say, just kind of giving up because one version didn't work before is, as you put it, very defeatist.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that you guys at Moneybox do, and one of the strategies that you do to get people to save and invest more is called rounding up. And I think this is probably what most people associate when they think of Moneybox. That brilliant advert where is it Kumquat or something like that, where they tap on the thing? Yeah. So if anyone hasn't heard about this, the idea behind it is that everyday purchases. So when you purchase something, it's rounded up, and the rounding up, it puts that savings into the nearest pound. So if something's, let's just say 83 pence, 70, it would round up to £1, and 17 pence would go into an ISA or something like a pension or something like that. Like, what are the figures on this? What's the statistics on this? Is it making people save more? Is it working? Are you seeing this kind of moving forward?
Yeah, so From our perspective, it's less of a tool to get people to save more, but just something that helps people get started. And it goes back to your accessibility question. And for us, as I say, I can't lay any claim to this. I joined 2 months ago, so I
Yeah.
wasn't here when this was kind of developed. But
Yeah.
roundups were a huge breakthrough in terms of breaking down that barrier and getting over that initial kind of scary step of investing by breaking it down into something really, really small. Like it can be very scary for people to put £100 into an investment that they may not quite understand or haven't heard before, but rounding up your spare change and it going into an ISA and potentially not paying as much attention to it and going back to your compound question of just letting it grow over time, like that has really broken down the barriers to a lot of people for investing. And for us, it helped people get started. And our hope and expectation is that that's a habit that then stays with them for life. So for us, roundups actually account for less than kind of 5% of our overall deposits. So as I say, it's very much a tool for customers to get started and then move on to other kind of savings methods, more traditional ones, such as kind of direct debits or instant transfers. So yeah, it wouldn't be something for saving more, but it just goes back to that accessibility question, which has always been such a difficult one to crack.
Yeah, it doesn't even have to be investing, it could even just be into saving. I mean, that's just a huge step towards, because we all know that emergency fund should be the absolute minimum and you should aim for that. So even if we could just round up and then put it into an emergency fund or something like that, just to get started, it's a psychological thing, isn't it? It definitely is. I mean, that 17p might not seem like much in that moment, but then when you compound it and like you mentioned there, as it adds up, it really does go towards being a useful strategy. So I love it. I think it's really interesting. And this is another big question for you. I'm sorry, Brian. But if we could, we talked about this before, if we could make more people save and invest their money from a much younger age, and I'm talking pretty much as young as people can imagine, even from when you first get your first bank account or something like that. What do you think society would look like in the future? Let's just say 30 years down the line. How do you think it would look if everyone started to save and invest more from a younger age?
Yeah, it's a big question. I'm probably oversimplifying it, but I think in a word, it would be better and a lot better. Like, I think the reason that I got into the industry and the reason that I kind of keep enjoying doing what I'm doing is I very much feel that everybody has this nagging doubt in the back of their mind that they should be doing more or different things with their money and their investments if they are investing, or their pensions is a massive source of anxiety for a lot of people as well. And I saw a stat yesterday, it was kind of Canadian based, but I think it kind of translates over here that people spend over 2 hours a day on average worrying about some aspect of their money. And if we were to solve that, and not even solve all of it, but if we were to solve 25% of that, just think of what could be achieved with all of that extra time, kind of cumulative around the globe, basically. So it's a grandiose kind of ambition to have, but it's such a wide and kind of global problem that, again, it's just something that needs to be chipped away at. And answering your question, it would be better, more productive, people would be less anxious. So it's a kind of worthwhile cause, I think, to be working towards.
Yeah, I've never really thought about it from the kind of time perspective. I've always just thought of it in the kind of purely financial sense of people would have more money. Like that's just, but I never actually thought about it in the productivity sense as well. Like that's a completely different string to the bow. I didn't realize as well that it was 2 hours a day that people worry about money. I probably do, to be fair, and with like it's almost subconscious sometimes. But yeah, it's really interesting perspective, and I don't think I've ever heard that before. So
no, I think you'd just be freeing people up, as I say, to do things, to build things, to spend more time on what they enjoy. So yeah, I think it would be a massive change for the better, but it's a long way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So if anyone in the audience needs some kind of motivation to save more, there you go. You'll have 2 hours extra a day in the future. So that'll be good. So we've been talking a lot about this recently, but you guys at Moneybox are actually building, as you mentioned before, a modern financial planning journey to help people save and invest more, like you mentioned before. But we ask this question a lot to people about what that actually looks like. So what is it that you think that modern financial planning actually looks like? Can we thrash that out? What do you think it is?
Yeah, I'm going to caveat this by it's kind of my personal opinion that I'm building into the process with Moneybox, and we're very early on this journey, but I hope it ends up kind of looking like this. But as I say, we're early in the journey, so you never know, and potentially a bit biased based on my background. But I do think a modern financial planning journey is digital. I think it's real time. I think it pulls in people's assets from different places, and you're not relying on people's memory to realize what they've kind of got in different places. I think it has to be personalized. I think there's a lot of good work that can be done in terms of rules of thumb and guidance, but if you're going through a financial planning journey, it has to be personalized and of value to the individual. And then kind of harking back to the question that we talked about a few minutes ago, I do feel that there should be some form of support available kind of on demand, basically, so people can reach out and ask questions about their financial situation or their financial plan if and when they need to. And then the final thing, I think is more of a bigger kind of ideal, is that it should be product agnostic. Like, one of my key learnings over the last 10 or 15 years is that majority of people don't really care about ISAs, SIPs, lifetime ISAs, tax relief, any of that. They're a means to an end for most people that don't really care about the financial industry. They want to go off and do their own jobs and have their own time. They don't care if they end up in an ISA or a pension or, as I say, lifetime ISA. And our jobs as financial advisors and financial planners is to translate all of those account types, technical knowledge into journeys and try and make them engaging and give them meaning as well. So, as I say, if you can translate all of that into a digital journey, as I say, that's what we're aiming for here at Moneybox.
Oh man, I love hearing stuff like that, because that is like, it's almost like when you find that out and when you realize it's not about pensions and products and all that kind of, it's like an enlightened moment. It's like you can see a brand new world. It's I think I call it selling a good night's sleep, not a mattress. You know, in reality, we are intermediate, like financial planners are intermediaries a lot of the time. So as in, like, they are actually, you know, giving products to people. But if you flip it and think that the product is actually you giving someone 5 years extra of their life in retirement so that they don't have to spend time working and worrying about money, that is a much more beneficial to clients than a pension or an ISA or anything like that could ever be. Even though a pension or ISA is technically the product, in reality, what you give them is the product. And that's when you discover that is like, whew, that's enormous, because you start off in your career in financial planning thinking it's all going to be about money and pensions and finances and funds and investments, all that kind of stuff. And then when you realize it's actually not about all of that kind of stuff, it just changes things completely.
Yeah, and you're pointed in that direction by the exams that we have to take, which is completely understandable because you need that technical knowledge. But most people spend the first 2, 3, 4 years going through exam after exam, which is based on account types, based on kind of tax rules, that sort of stuff. And then you need to supplement it with the soft skills and the experience of speaking to clients. And it's kind of, once you go through both sides of that and you learn from more experienced financial planners and that sort of stuff of how to bring that to life and make it engaging and stop talking about products, then, as you say, it is quite enlightening. But the first 2 or 3 years of our careers is understandably spent on regulation and exams. So you come out of that process thinking a lot in product, and it takes quite a while to kind of dampen down that side and get it more into the customer journey and experience.
Yeah. Definitely does. Yeah. Okay, cool. That's I think a lot of people in the audience would probably agree with what you would think a modern financial planning business would look like. So that's cool. And obviously, if Moneybox is technically counted as a fintech company, I think would they be counted as a fintech? And that the world, I think I was talking about this yesterday with someone on the podcast as well. I think is fintech the largest growing industry in the UK at the moment, or it's certainly up there with them. It's growing fast.
Wouldn't surprise me. Yeah.
And it's moving forward, and it's exciting, and it ranges from, you know, all the way from banking all the way to budgeting and financial planning in the middle as well. But what are you most excited about in the world of fintech at this point in time? It'll change, but what are you most excited about right now?
I think if I look forward to the next kind of 5 or 10 years, it's not actually anything kind of technical or an app or a product or a company, but it's actually how community develops over the next kind of 5 or 10 years. I think that used to be, if it was thought of at all, it was very much the last thought for companies of their kind of community of investors, or be it shareholders or whatever. But if we look at financial Twitter, if we look at Instagram, Reddit, or if you look at more formal communities like Finimize or shareholder forums of any of these companies that have crowdfunded, I think there's an absolutely huge demand there and a craving for information and to be part of a community that openly discusses everything that we've kind of talked about here in terms of money, financial planning, investing, all that sort of stuff. So there's massive, massive demand for there. So I'm really excited about where those communities go over the next 5 to 10 years. Maybe features, products, apps come out of that. Maybe it doesn't. But that personally is what excites me more than a product or a technical innovation, and I'm sure you guys have seen the potential of community with NextGen as well. So probably preaching to the converted here, but I think there's just so much that can be done from a community angle and so much demand there because people do want to engage, but they want to engage in something that is accessible and it feels like they're talking to people that are like them, and it's just kind of less scary as well. So yeah, very much excited where the community angle of fintech goes over the next 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we don't get that kind of personal relationship from banks and from providers anymore that we used to perhaps get, like, you know, going to branches. That's gone now with automation, with tech and that kind of stuff. So but it's clear that people still need that, and that's where communities come from, is when they don't feel like they're getting that from somewhere else. So I agree with you. I think that's I didn't expect you to say that, to be honest, Brian, but it's a lovely perspective to have. I'd love to see that growth. Obviously, yeah, like you said, you're preaching to the converted because we can see the power of communities. Absolutely. Be lovely to see that. And it's kind of related there to the next question, but when we think of the financial planning world, I know that kind of you've been in it for, what did you say, 15 years now or something like that?
Yeah.
You've seen it grow in those 15 years, I would imagine. What are you most excited to see for the next 10 years? Like what in the financial planning world, what's most exciting in the next 10 years?
Yeah, this probably is a little bit more technical, and it's probably looking at the kind of financial planning community as a bit of an echo chamber here, but it would be more fulsome use of open banking or finance. Like I still think a lot of people in our community still have that spreadsheet that has their assets, their liabilities, potentially their income and expenditure on that. And it's still a very manual process for a lot of people. There's lots of apps out there that are trying to turn it into a digital journey and give you one picture of exactly how you stand in terms of your financial health. But if I'm very honest, I did think we would probably be further along on that journey than we are now. But I'd be very surprised if we weren't able to log in somewhere in kind of 10 years time and see a really good picture of our financial health kind of in one place with the way that open banking and open finance is tracking. So that will be great for the people that do it already manually, because it will be a huge kind of time saver. But I think it will be a game changer for people that don't do that sort of thing and just don't know what their position is now. Once you're able to see these things, see your position, you're able to improve it, or you're able to take steps to increase your income, reduce your expenditure, pay down your liabilities, increase your assets, whatever those kind of positive steps that we want to take are. So once you see them, you can take those steps, or potentially you can share that data with a financial planner and they can have a real-time picture of your financial position, and they're able to give you advice that is not based on kind of your memory or out of date data or personal biases in terms of kind of what you think you spend. Because whenever people engage with a financial planner, they always say I spend X, and then you look at bank accounts and it's much, much more than that. So if we can get away from that, and as I say, within the next 5 to 10 years, I fully expect with open banking and finance there to be a lot of progress in that space. And I think it will help people take their own actions, and it will also massively help our community do better financial plans based on exact personal financial situations rather than kind of guesstimates.
Yeah, when this came in, I think it was like 2018, 2019, open banking came in. Because, I mean, when it got announced, everyone was like, oh my God, like it's going to change overnight and everyone's going to start using it. And then, as I think I've mentioned this in a previous podcast, it's not really kicked off to the extent that we thought it would. Like you said there, we thought we would be further down the line now. And when we think of the next, if there's going to be another cost of living crisis in the future, the ability to weed out those secret spenders. I would probably say I'm a secret spender. What I tell people I spend is vastly different to what I actually spend every month. But if you think about it, if you could put that right earlier on for those people who were talking about like under 45, under 40, if there is another cost of living crisis in the future, the knock-on effect of that could be that they're not as affected as they were now, or they've got more emergency funds and they've got more savings and things like that, because they realize early on that, you know, they're spending a lot more than they think they actually are. It's a really interesting perspective again.
Yeah, I
Great
think the
stuff.
innovations that we've seen have been helpful in terms of like open payments makes life easier. I think kind of account aggregation and spending analysis helps, but each of those are quite individual right now. And I would fully expect within kind of 5 to 10 years, there'll be some more holistic view where you can see this all together and you can take next best actions basically based on your situation. So I think that is genuinely exciting. It should be very exciting for financial planning community,
Yeah.
as I say, being able to build financial plans on top of kind of exact information.
Yeah. Good stuff. Let's see what we can do. Let's see what we can build. That'd be good to see. Good stuff. Well, we've been talking for 40 minutes now. That's flew by, hasn't it? So I think we'll probably finish things there. But it's been great conversation with you, Brian. We do always like to finish the show with two things. So the first of those is that we like to ask everyone for a book or I don't put this in the script, by the way, but it could be anything. It can be a film, it can be an album, it can be a bit of content, it can be a TikTok, anything, or a Vine if you're like me and you're, of that generation. But we always like to ask guests for something that has helped them in their career so far. So what would you recommend our audience consume?
Yeah, I'll probably stick with books for two reasons. One, I'll probably panic if I try and broaden that out into those other areas.
Everyone does.
But I actually run a kind of semblance of a book club on my Instagram, which is basically just spamming my friends and family with books that I've read that I think they should read as well. So narrowing this down was actually quite difficult. But for our community, the best one I've read probably in the last 2 years is a book called How I Invest My Money by Joshua Brown and Brian Portnoy. And it's basically financial professionals being really, really open and honest about what they do with their money. And it's somewhat interesting in terms of the solutions that they use or what they invest in. But the more interesting part was, even for financial professionals, so much emotion goes into their decision making. So it's people investing in their friends' companies, even though they know it might not be the best kind of financial return. But that's just kind of one example of kind of how the emotion kind of comes into it. So heavily recommend that for our community. And then I'll squeeze in a second one, which is just more broader, which was a book called Why We Sleep, which is relatively famous, but I would say massively changed my life in terms of how I prioritize getting enough rest and sleep and making sure that I'm kind of energized for the day ahead. So yeah, those would be the two.
Absolutely, mate. That's weird because I actually slept for 9 hours last night, and the difference today has been. I'm always a bit skeptical about that kind of stuff, but like the difference in my productivity today has been crazy. So yeah, it's weird that you mentioned that. It shows you the universe is a weirdly aligned place. I'm not going to go into all that kind of stuff today. Well, thank you so much, mate. What we like to do is we like to give the last word to our guests to say a big thank you for coming on the show and joining us. So can you tell our audience where to find you, how to connect with you, maybe plug a little bit of Moneybox if you want to, and also just, close things off for us, Brian?
Yeah, absolutely. So LinkedIn's probably the best place to find me. Brian Byrnes, Moneybox on there should be pretty easy to find. If you have one takeaway from a Moneybox perspective, is that we're much more than a Roundups app now. So have a look at the website and see kind of everything else that we do. So that's my cheeky plug. But yeah, thank you very much for having me. And yeah, we'll see you all very soon.
Brilliant stuff. Yeah, I probably I'm going to get told off by Moneybox's marketing team now because I know that they're trying to move away from just being that Roundup thing. So yeah, they obviously offer way more than just that Roundup thing. So go and check them out when you get a chance. But yeah, that's been Brian Byrnes, who's the head of personal finance at Moneybox. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can find it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, obviously, because you're already listening on those, but you can also watch it on YouTube, and we're also on Google Podcasts as well, and you can share it on all the big social media channels. So we've got LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram, and I say this every podcast, but we will be coming on TikTok at some point in the future, I would imagine. And also you can find it on nextgenplanners.co.uk, where you'll find out more information about the stuff we do here at NextGen, including the amazing community, which now is 800 financial planning hero strong. And of course, our conference, which is coming up in 2023, which we'll probably have announced by the time this podcast goes live. So you can check that out on our website as well. And then the final thing I always forget to ask you guys who are listening to do is to leave us a review. So if you can just leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, it massively helps us. And it also gives us some insights into what you guys enjoy, so we can make our future episodes as good as they possibly can be as well. But that's all from us today. I'll stop talking now because you're probably very bored of hearing me talk. So I just want to say a big thank you to Brian for joining us on today's show. Thank you guys at home, as always, for listening, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.